Hello there. Today I wanted to take a look at a Bordeaux Cru Classe. This is Chateau Cantmerle from Macau in the Haut Medoc, and that's a 5th growth. And I thought it would be good to cover the story of Chateau Cantmerle as well as tasting the wine, obviously, because I said in a previous video about Chateau Lanassin that there'd only been one change to the 1855 classification, and I was sort of right, but I'd forgotten about Chateau Cantmerle, because when the classification was released in 1855, Cantmerle hadn't been included. Evidently the estate had generally been selling privately to customers in the Netherlands and hadn't traded through the merchants in Bordeaux. And the way that the classification was arrived at was that a committee of merchants looked back at the last century's worth of prices and saw which wines had commanded the highest, and those were included. Evidently, the chateau's owner, somebody called Caroline de Villeneuve, was somewhat peeved by this, and immediately collected her papers showing how much she'd sold the wine for, and went and visited the Union of Consulars, who had Courtier, who had produced the classification. Some people had later went on and complained to the Chamber of Commerce, who were overseeing the whole thing. They weren't successful, but Caroline de Villeneuve obviously was very persuasive and had found the right people to speak to. So if you actually look at the written release of the wines in the 1855 classification, you'll see that at the bottom there's a line very firmly drawn, and the Chateau Cantmerle has been squeezed in above that at a later date subsequent to the actual publication of the original classification. So it just shows that if producers were interested in being on that, they could make sure that they were, and clearly Caroline was a persuasive lady there. Cantmerle's history subsequently to that, in I believe it was about the early 1890s, the Dubos family bought the estate, and it was in their hands until 1981. And various financial crises had hit, and the vineyards had been reduced down to about 20 hectares. But in 1981, a French insurance company, whose name I will never remember, but it's normally reduced to calling them SMABTP, an insurance group took over, and they invested in the property. They've replanted vineyards, and now there are about 90 hectares of vines at Cantmerle. And Cantmerle is a very correct and very consistent wine. It's not the most spectacular claret, it's perhaps a little bit on the lighter side, but it's a very correct sort of style. It's predominantly Cabernet Sauvignon. They have some lovely free draining gravel and with quartz, silica soils there. So there's good drainage, so it suits Cabernet Sauvignon really nicely. And actually Cantmerle is one of the first Cru Classe that you come to as you drive up the Medoc. Macau, where it is fairly close to Bordeaux. So and you pass a beautiful park with very ornate gates and that sort of thing as you go by. As I say, the wine's incredibly consistent. There's an awful lot of sorting goes on of the fruit. The wine spends about 12 to 16 months from vintage to vintage. This was 19 was quite a good vintage, so probably spent longer, about 16 months maybe, in oak, and about half of those were new French oak barrels, and the rest would have been seasoned oak. So let's talk about what we're tasting in the wine, shall we? Interestingly, I tasted this as non-Primeur wine, and a lot of what I saw in my notes there I'm seeing here. There's a lovely depth of colour, not quite opaque, ruby red, not particularly purple at the rim, so it's losing a little bit of its youth there. The wine is producing a few tears. I didn't see the alcohol is 13.5%, so that's pretty normal. And so let's see the aromas. I talked about Cantmerle being very correct, and that is a very very typical aroma there. You've got aromas of cassis, that sort of quite pronounced blackcurranty note with touches of leafiness, perhaps a sort of a slight red curranty note as well. And there's a little bit of graphite in the background, sort of showing where the oak aging is, but you know, very very correct, medium intensity, exactly what you'd expect from a wine with a reasonable amount of Cabernet Sauvignon. I didn't actually say, I think the percentages here, in 2019 there was 68% of Cabernet Sauvignon, 23% of Merlot, 5% of Cabernet Franc and 4% of Petit Verdot. So that's a pretty typical blend for Cantemerle, I believe. So let's have a taste. The wine is medium bodied and there's quite a slightly cedary, graphite-y sort of structure there coming through. Nice freshness, again juicy cassis, maybe hints of red currant, a little bit of mulberry behind. Finishing lovely and juicy, that sort of red fruit, red currant, mulberry note on the finish, and it's lasting reasonably well. The alcohol's nicely balanced, it's not at all hot, and yes, exactly what I'd expect from Cantemerle. A really nice value for money wine, very consistent in its style and its quality. So thank you for watching. Do join us again. Bye now.